So we're going to take a look at a few features of the MMT-8, just a kind of little demo tutorial of it. Later on in the video, I've got a full kind of track that I do with it, which I'll come back to in a sec, but I'll kind of show you how I put that together, at least in part with this section of the video. So there's a few kind of features that I really like about this, and kind of is what drew me to buying it in the first place. Like, I originally got it for a specific project with one of my old bands where I wanted to go essentially doorless. And the first thing that I really liked about it was this kind of setup it has down here, where it has 8 separate tracks, which can all be muted on and off using these buttons here, kind of like a DAW. So, and each one of these tracks can have different bits of MIDI data on it. So, you know, in theory, you could have, and this is what I'll show you later on in the video, you can have maybe kick and snare on that, hi-hat, cowbells, other percussion, and then some bass line and different synths along here. And then you have the ability to toggle them in and out live, which I think is a really neat feature for a MIDI sequencer. And it's not a one that I'm particularly familiar with on a piece of equipment of this sort of age anyway, really. I think there's some newer ones that allow you to do this. Aside from that, it's got some other nice features which we'll sort of run through now. So the first of which is this MIDI echo button, which is allows you to essentially monitor your incoming MIDI. So whatever MIDI is coming in on the import will then be copied over the output. So you can use this to monitor your recording. So say you're playing a keyboard and you want to record that in, but before you hit record, you can kind of listen to it via the echo function, which I think is a really neat little feature. So for example, I've got some MIDI notes coming from Ableton in this demonstration, which we'll come back to in a second, or look at more thoroughly in a second. But it means I can essentially try out my MIDI, or you can try out your MIDI parts using the MIDI echo without having to record them in, but still be able to monitor them. So for example, if I hit play on this, you can hear we've got a kick part and a kick and snare part coming from Ableton here on the import. And then because MIDI echo's on, it's now being echoed over to this port and being played back on this thing here, which is super useful for recording MIDI in. In this instance, obviously, I'm using a laptop with the MIDI all prepared on it. In, you know, kind of real life, or how this is, when this was originally made, this is probably more likely to be things like, you know, drum machines, or perhaps somebody playing a keyboard. And the process is exactly the same. I'm just using Ableton Live to make things a little bit easier for this video. So that's the MIDI echo. In terms of these tracks as well, these tracks, each of them can be set to any MIDI channel you want, and that can be done manually by holding the MIDI channel button, selecting the track that you want to change, and then scrolling up here and setting whichever channel you want it to be on. The device will also automatically pick up the MIDI channel as well. So if I send in something on MIDI channel 10 to record onto this track here, that will default that to MIDI channel 10. And you can have, of these tracks, multiple of them can be on the same MIDI channel. So in this instance with a drum machine, which is the sort of base layer of this track, and I'll show you the track with other layers as well. What I ended up doing was having a kick and snare on that track, hi-hat on this track, and then things like cowbells and cymbals and stuff. And they're all on channel 10, but they're all on separate tracks, so I can still bring them in and out individually, which I thought was kind of neat. And I wasn't sure if, when I first started using it, if these would kind of be locked to just, you know, MIDI channel 1, MIDI channel 2, MIDI channel 3, etc. So I thought that was a really nice feature. The other kind of features it has, which are kind of useful for recording, I guess more for live recording than what I was using it for, is to do with the click. So it's got a pretty comprehensive metronome sort of section. We can open the click menu by holding click, and then we can use the page up and down to move between different parts of it. So, you know, we can set the value or the kind of division of the click. So in this case, it's 1/4, fairly standard, but that goes up to 1/64 as well, all the way up and all the steps in between. We can obviously turn the click on and off, should we want to use it or not. And also we can add a countdown as well to the start of tracks, which if you're kind of familiar with modern DAWs like Ableton Live, that's a super useful thing for recording, because it gives you time to get into the rhythm before you start recording, so you're not going cold straight into the beginning of the track. And again, I believe that can be set to any value that you wish as well. So it's on a count of 4, but I think in theory you can set that to anything you want, which again, I think that's a super useful feature. There's 2 ways of hearing the click. There's a speaker built in to the base of the unit which plays the click out, which at the moment doesn't seem to be working on mine. I seem to remember it working when I first got it, which was a few years ago now. And I also seem to remember there was a kind of a volume control for it, which I just can't for the life of me find. So I don't know if I've misremembered that, or if there's something wrong with the speaker in mine. You can also take the click out via a jack on the back of the device. I'll maybe hold it up so you can see what's on the back. There's a click out as well there, and it's also a start-stop button if you want to use foot switch. It also has a built-in tape synchronizing sort of device. So if you wanted to use this with a 4-track recorder or reel-to-reel or something, and you want to use the tape sync signal to like strike on the tape and then be the master clock, it has that built in, which I think is a really neat feature. I guess more so in the 80s when this was new, but you know, that sort of stuff still has a bit of a use now. So in terms of how to record, it's fairly straightforward. You first of all hold the record button, then you select the track you want. I think you can perhaps record in multiples as well, although I've never tried that. So I'm going to select track 1. It's now armed. And then all I need to do to start recording would be to send some MIDI data in to either start playing, or in this case from Ableton, I'll be sending in a MIDI clock and then some drums. Before I do that though, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the counting because we don't want that, just because, you know, we're not using counting, we're just going straight in at the start. So I'm going to turn off the counting down to 0. Yep, and then I'm going to turn the click off because we're not going to use that. It's just a fairly standard kind of clicking noise. I don't necessarily need that. So now I guess we in theory we're ready to record. So I've got a kick and a snare part queued up over here in Ableton, which will be then recorded down onto track 1. If I turn MIDI echo on, we'll be able to hear that going in and coming back out of the drum machines. Oh yeah, before I get into recording, just a note on the clock. We can manually set a tempo in here, and the clock can be set to either internal or MIDI internal, which will basically go back to the internal clock when there's no MIDI, but when there's MIDI clock, it'll use that, which allows you to synchronize it at drum machines and in this case, other sequences, in this case, Ableton Live. So we kind of now ready to record. We've turned the click off, we've turned the counting off. I'm gonna go ahead and hit the record button. I'm gonna select track 1. If I do that again, hit record button, select track 1. Now we can see the record is armed. All the lights are up because that just means all the tracks are on. But now when I hit play over here on Ableton, but again, this could be you playing keyboard, this could be a drum machine. What's going to happen is the MIDI's going to come out of Ableton, be recorded in here. It's going to be echoed out of the output via the MIDI echo thing, and then into this drum machine. So you can see it's counting up the beats, and this will carry on essentially until you stop it. So it's going to turn the drum machine down a little bit just so you can hear us talking. If that's going to work. Nope. Sorry, I had it running through a mixer. So you can see it's counting up, and that will go on kind of as long as the part is, and as long as you've got kind of note memory left to use in the sequencer. This part's quite long, but we don't necessarily have to record the whole thing. So I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording now. And now I'll stop Ableton, or indeed I could just turn this off and we won't hear anymore, but you know, I'm just going to stop Ableton. And now what we should have when I press play is that part playing back there, and I can turn it on and off using the mute button as sort of discussed before. So, you know, now I've got one part in. Usually you want to layer parts up, so let's go ahead and add maybe another drum layer to this. So in this case, we're going to move on to kind of a hi-hat part, which I've already got queued up over here. So now repeat the process to record. So I hold record, but this time I want to select track 2, and it kind of says which one you already selected because it's kind of like the previous tracks lit up fully, but these are still flashing. So we move over to this one now, and now we're going to be armed to record on track 2. The sequence will go back to the beginning of the phrase of the thing that we've recorded. So, and when I hit play on Ableton over here, we're going to now, again, because MIDI echoes on, we're going to hear both parts together. So now what we're hearing is we are hearing the hi-hats being recorded in by MIDI echo, and we're hearing the kick and snare parts that we recorded in already. And I'm just going to turn it down a second just so you can kind of hear us a little bit better. Hopefully that's a good level. One thing I will say is the first part you record in will set the length of the pattern. So those of you observant enough to kind of notice what number we got up to here before will see that that's when it'll stop, well, the pattern will stop essentially. You can manually adjust the length of the pattern. So see we've got to 91, and now what it's doing is it's essentially stopped recording. So that's kind of nice in a way, because then you could set up the right length for your part and kind of have it stop automatically. And you can also manually change the length of the part if it's too long, if it's too short. There are ways to do that as well, via kind of the edit menus and stuff like that. So now, like, looking at the device, what we've got is we've got kick and snare on here, and we've got hi-hats on this one. So when I hit play on it, and I was going to mute the other tracks, just they're not doing anything, but it's going to turn them off. So obviously nothing right now. Turn on the kick and snare, and then we can add the hi-hat. And stop. So you can see you could quite happily build up you know, a whole track on here, and there's a couple of ways of structuring that. I'm kind of doing it the lazy way, which is I'm just using one single part and just recording the full length into it, which when I show you the full track later in the video, you'll see is about 2 minutes long. And I think that's only limited by the amount of memory left, note memory left, basically. The memory's kind of, I can't exactly remember the exact number. I'll try and find out for you and put it on screen. But there's like an upper limit of notes that it can store. So as long as the part's shorter than that, the part can be that long. Do you know what I mean? So it could be 5 minutes long, whatever, however long it needs to be to encompass, to like, but not fill up the memory with notes. The other more kind of correct way, or the better way of doing it, or the more traditional way of doing it, would be to essentially make various different parts. So maybe your song, you'd have an intro part, verse 1, chorus, verse 2, bridge, etc. And then you can switch between them, or manually by just when one's playing. If you do that, it'll once it stopped playing, it'll move on to the next part, or you can chain them together into a song using the song mode. I believe the merge mode allows you to combine stuff on different tracks from one track to another. I've not really used that much, I could be wrong. And there is also a loop function, so you can turn on the loop or turn on or off the loop for different parts. So you could very much do kind of live looping with it as well, which I think is something people liked kind of about it. And there is a kind of modern hardware sequencer, which the name escapes me, but again, I'll put it on the screen with some links, which very much mimics its setup, and I've been told is pretty similar to this, and is also quite a nice device if you want to do kind of live looping MIDI stuff. There are also some other kind of features which we're not going to dive too much into, which are things like MIDI filtering to take out information you don't want. And you can go through and edit notes, and you can go and change lengths, delete notes, all that sort of good stuff. You can also, as I said before, sync it up to tape. And you can also quantize things. Obviously, this is pretty quantized already because it's just coming from, you know, it's already quantized in Ableton, now it's being played back into there. But it's a pretty fully featured device. The one issue that I guess that it does have, or you might face with it, is that it has a volatile memory. So it requires a battery, like a Varta battery backup thing, which is soldered to the sort of main board, which one or two issues can occur with that, I guess. First of all is that they run out, so the memory doesn't work. I mean, when I got this, say three years ago, I changed the battery. I did a terrible job of it, which is a whole another story, but I changed the battery, and now it was working fine, and now that doesn't work. So, you know, if you wanted to use it for a gig, you'd have to put a new battery in it. It's not the hardest thing to change in the world. It does require soldering. I'll maybe put some pictures up on screen of the battery and stuff like that, just to get a good idea of that. And the other issue with that is, of course, I guess the battery itself could leak over time. That being said, I think I was the first person that changed this battery when I got it, and it's obviously maybe 15, 20 years old, at least when I got it, you know, probably more, you know, 25 years old. And the battery didn't seem to have leaked, so I think that's a good thing, but, you know, you do hear about that with kind of vintage computer gear and stuff. So, you know, those are the basic features, and as I said before, you can kind of change once you've recorded stuff in. Say, for example, you wanted this to be on a different MIDI channel than it is. In the minute it's on 10, because that's what it's recorded in as. You could go ahead and change that to any MIDI channel you want using the plus and minus keys. And yeah, anyway, the thing that I really like is this kind of interface here with the track mute, track on and off things. There is also a fast forward and rewind, which I think if you're going through and manually editing notes, so changing notes or changing lengths of things, you can use that to skip forward and back. The screen's pretty easy to read, it's backlit, which is quite nice. There is a whole heap of instructions kind of buried in this rather cute little thing up here, which I just think it's a really neat idea, because, you know, you don't always, especially I guess in the 80s or, you know, the 90s or whatever, when this thing was more popular, you don't necessarily be able to go on the internet and just get the manual. Like now I can just go on Google and just find the manual whenever I want to look at it. But you know, back then it's nice to have this kind of quick start kind of guide that covers the basics of stuff. Yeah, all around, I really like it as a sequencer. I think it's a sequencer that can still have a lot of use these days. And I'll show you a track, a sort of demo track now, which I think demonstrates its capabilities very well. So that was a look at the Alesis MMT-8 sequencer. A bit of a quick run through, but I kind of wanted to cover the main thing, which was kind of recording it, the tracks and this track interface thing. Yeah, I'm sure there's ones that go deeper into chaining songs up and using the quantize and all these sorts of stuff over here. But I think, you know, in the modern kind of setup where you're more likely to, or at least potentially more likely to have made stuff on a computer to begin with, and then you're moving it to a live set, which is what I want to do with it. You don't really have to go beyond just being able to record on the individual tracks. The rest of it sort of takes care of itself as long as you're using sort of a master clock from whichever device you're bouncing the MIDI into. Anyway, thanks for watching, guys. Hope the video was interesting. Hope you guys enjoyed the track. The track itself is available as part of my newest album, Industrialized Magic. Links should be in the description. And yeah, thanks for watching, guys.